Hey guys, tonight we're doing something special. Not just one myth, not one chapter, but an entire journey through time. From the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Japan to the frozen skies of the Norse. You're about to hear the greatest myths in human history in one calm, quiet session. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and get ready to drift. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? I read every comment. It's always wild to see people tuning in from all over the world. Now take a deep breath and settle in. This is Myth Night, where you relax, and I tell you myth stories from the ancient past. And if you fall asleep before the end, that's okay. Some stories were made to be finished in dreams. In the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers wound through golden sands like serpents of silver, there lived a king whose name echoed through eternity. Gilgamesh ruled the great city of Uruk, his walls towering toward the heavens, his power unmatched by any mortal ruler. Yet for all his strength and glory, he carried within his heart a restlessness as vast as the desert itself. Picture this mighty king, two-thirds divine and one-third human, walking the cedar-scented halls of his palace as moonlight streams through narrow windows. His friend Enkidu, wild man of the forest turned loyal companion, has died, and Gilgamesh feels the cold touch of mortality for the first time. Death, that great mystery, has stolen his dearest friend, and now the king understands that even he, mighty as he is, must one day join the silent realm of shadows. Driven by grief and terror, Gilgamesh abandons his throne and sets forth on a journey that will take him to the very edges of the world. He seeks Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, the only mortal granted immortality by the gods. Through scorching deserts and treacherous mountains, past the dwelling of the sun god, and through the tunnel of darkness, Gilgamesh travels with the desperate hopes of cheating death itself. The scorpion men guard the mountain passes, their forms terrible and magnificent in the pre-dawn light. They watch this king who walks like a beggar, his royal robes torn and dusty, his face gaunt with obsession. "Why do you journey so far from home?" they ask, their voices like wind through stone. Death comes to all mortals, even kings. But Gilgamesh presses on, driven by a love for his friend that transcends the boundaries of life and death. He crosses the waters of death itself, guided by the ferryman who has never before carried a living soul. The boat cuts silently through dark waters that reflect no stars, and the silence is so complete it seems to press against the king's soul like a living thing. When at last he reaches Utnapishtim's distant shore, the ancient survivor looks upon him with eyes that have seen the world drown and be reborn. Life is fleeting, the immortal tells him, his voice soft as rustling reeds. Like dragonflies, we skim the surface of existence for our brief moment, then are gone. The gods have kept immortality for themselves and given mortals death as their portion. Yet Utnapishtim, moved by the king's devotion, reveals a secret. At the bottom of the sweet water, grows a plant that restores youth to whoever possesses it. Gilgamesh dives deep into those crystalline depths, his lungs burning, his hands closing around thorny stems that cut his flesh. He emerges with the precious plant, its leaves shimmering with an otherworldly light. The journey home passes like a dream. Gilgamesh guards his treasure carefully, planning to test its power on an old man in his city before using it himself. But on one warm evening, As he bathes in a clear pool, a serpent emerges from the water's depths. The snake, drawn by the plant's magical fragrance, devours it in a single moment and slithers away, shedding its old skin and emerging renewed. Gilgamesh sits by the water's edge and weeps, not for his lost chance at immortality, but for the beauty of what he has learned. The plant was not meant for him. The snake, following its nature, has shown him the true secret. Life renews itself, not through desperate grasping, but through acceptance of its cycles. The king returns to Uruk transformed. His quest has failed in its original purpose, but succeeded in ways he never imagined. He has learned that immortality lies not in extending life indefinitely, but in creating works that outlast the brief span of mortal years. His walls still stand, his epic still echoes, and his love for Enkidu has become eternal through the telling of their story. This oldest of recorded tales, carved into clay tablets 4,000 years ago, whispers to us across the centuries of humanity's eternal questions. What does it mean to love someone so deeply that their death transforms our understanding of life itself? How do we find meaning in a world where everything we cherish must eventually be lost? The Epic of Gilgamesh offers no easy answers, only the gentle suggestion that perhaps the search for meaning is more important than the certainty of finding it. In reaching for immortality, Gilgamesh discovered something far more precious, the understanding that our mortality gives weight to our choices, urgency to our love, and poignancy to every fleeting moment of beauty we encounter. Chapter 2: The Lost Island, Atlantis. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, where the Mediterranean Sea meets the vast Atlantic Ocean, the ancient Greeks spoke of an island that existed in a time before memory. Atlantis rose from waters so blue they seemed to hold fragments of the sky, its gleaming towers reaching toward clouds that never brought storms to that blessed land. Plato, the great philosopher, described this marvel in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might somehow disturb the delicate balance that had once sustained such perfection. Picture, if you will, an island shaped like 3 perfect circles, each ring of land separated by channels of the clearest water. At the very center stood a temple to Poseidon, god of the seas, its walls covered in precious metals that caught the light like captured stars. The Atlanteans were descendants of the sea god himself, and in the early days of their civilization, this divine heritage showed in everything they built and created. Their ships moved without sails, propelled by some mysterious force that worked in harmony with the ocean's currents. Their buildings grew from the living rock as if the earth itself desired to house these children of divinity. Gardens bloomed eternal spring, heavy with fruits that sustained both body and spirit. In the harbor, ships from every corner of the known world brought tribute and wonder. The Atlanteans had discovered secrets that other civilizations could barely imagine: metals that never tarnished, crystals that stored sunlight and released it as gentle warmth during the night, healing arts that could mend both body and soul. Knowledge flowed through their society like water through the carefully crafted channels that surrounded their city. The rulers of Atlantis governed not through force, but through wisdom, their decisions guided by deep understanding of the natural world's hidden rhythms. They knew the language of dolphins and whales, could predict the weather by observing the color of deep ocean waters, and maintained their island's perfect climate through subtle cooperation with the elemental forces that shaped their world. For generations beyond counting, this paradise flourished. Children learned not only the practical arts of building and farming, but also the deeper mysteries of harmony between human desire and natural law. They understood that true wealth lay not in accumulation, but in the graceful circulation of abundance, like the tides that brought gifts from distant shores and carried away what was no longer needed. But as centuries passed, something began to change in the hearts of the Atlanteans. The divine blood that flowed in their veins grew thinner with each generation, and with it diminished their connection to the wisdom that had once guided every aspect of their lives. Where once they had created in harmony with natural forces, they began to impose their will upon the world around them. Their technology, once a gentle partnership with elemental powers, became increasingly forceful and demanding. They developed weapons that could level mountains, built cities that reached so high they cast shadows over distant lands, and began to view other civilizations not as fellow travelers on the path of wisdom, but as resources to be controlled and exploited. The rings of water that had once been sanctuaries for meditation and renewal were bridged with monuments to military conquest. The temple at their island's heart, once a place of grateful communion with the sea god, became a fortress where rulers planned campaigns against distant shores. The very channels that had brought them prosperity were deepened and militarized, creating harbors for fleets whose purpose was dominion rather than trade. Poseidon watched these changes with the patience of deep waters, but also with the gathering power of storm clouds on the horizon. The god who had blessed his children with such abundance saw that abundance itself had become corruption. Their gifts, meant to serve wisdom, had been turned to serve pride and conquest. The end, when it came, was both sudden and inevitable. In a single day and night of catastrophe, earthquake and flood reclaimed the island that had forgotten its origins. The sea that had sustained Atlantis for so many centuries opened to receive it back, and the waves closed over towers and temples as if they had never existed. Some say the destruction was complete, that Atlantis vanished without trace beneath waters that revealed no sign of what they had swallowed. Others whisper that fragments of the great civilization survived, a crystal here, a scroll there, enough wisdom preserved to inspire later cultures with half-remembered glimpses of what human society might achieve when it remembers its proper relationship with the forces that sustain all life. The legend of Atlantis has haunted human imagination for over 2,000 years, not because we believe such a place actually existed, but because it represents something that feels eternally true about the rise and fall of civilizations. Every society that achieves great power faces the same choice that confronted the Atlanteans: whether to use that power in service of wisdom or in service of ambition. Perhaps Atlantis lives on not as a lost island beneath the waves, but as a vision of what becomes possible when human creativity aligns with natural harmony, and as a warning of what we lose when we forget that our greatest achievements must always serve something larger than our own desire for dominance. Chapter 3: The Twilight of Gods, Ragnarok. In the frozen realm of the north, where winter nights stretch longer than summer days, and the aurora borealis paints the sky in colors that have no earthly names, the Norse peoples told of an ending that was also a beginning. Ragnarok, they called it, the twilight of the gods, the final battle that would consume the current world and clear the way for something new to emerge from the ashes of the old. The gods of Asgard had always known this ending would come. It was written in the very foundations of their cosmos, prophesied by the Norns, who wove fate itself at the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree whose roots and branches connected all the 9 realms of existence. Even Odin, the All-Father, wise beyond measure and hungry for knowledge, could not prevent what had been foretold, though he spent eons preparing for the inevitable conflict. Fools, listen to the wind that howls across the Scandinavian mountains, and you might hear echoes of the signs that would herald the world's end. First would come the Fimbulwinter, 3 years of the harshest cold imaginable, with no summer to break the grip of ice and snow. Wolves would devour the sun and moon, plunging the world into perpetual darkness. Brothers would turn against brothers, and the bonds that held society together would snap like overstretched rope. The earth itself would begin to shake, loosening the chains that bound Fenrir, the monstrous wolf whose growth had so alarmed the gods that they had bound him with magical fetters on a lonely island. But no chain, however strong, could hold back destiny. When Fenrir breaks free, his howl will shatter the last pretense that order can triumph permanently over chaos. From the depths of the ocean, Jörmungandr, the world serpent, will rise, its massive coils thrashing in waters that boil with venom. This creature, so vast it encircles the entire earth with its body, will emerge from the deep, spewing poison that clouds the very air. The seas will surge over the land, carrying away forests and mountains in their fury. In the realm of the dead, Hell will marshal her armies of the dishonored fallen, while from Muspelheim, the realm of fire, Surtur will come with his flaming sword, leading hosts of fire giants to burn away the old world. The Rainbow Bridge, Bifrost, which had connected the realm of gods to the realm of humans, will crack and shatter under the weight of marching armies. On the plain of Vigrid, wide enough to hold all the armies of all the worlds, the final battle will commence. Odin, mounted on his 8-legged horse Sleipnir, and wielding his spear Gungnir, that never misses its mark, will face Fenrir the wolf. Thor, strongest of the gods, will meet Jörmungandr in single combat, his hammer Mjolnir crackling with lightning as he strikes at the serpent's poisonous coils. One by one, the gods will fall. Odin will be devoured by Fenrir, though the wolf will immediately be slain by Vidar, Odin's son, who will tear the beast's jaws apart with his bare hands. Thor will kill the world serpent, but will die from its venom 9 steps after his victory. Freyr will fall to Surtur's flame, having given away his magical sword for love. Tyr will die locked in combat with Garm, the Hound of Hell. As the battle reaches its climax, Surtur will raise his sword and engulf the world in flame. The world tree itself will burn, its branches crackling as fire consumes the very structure that had held the cosmos together. Stars will fall from the sky like dying embers, and the earth will sink beneath the boiling sea. But this is not merely a story of ending. From the ashes of Ragnarok, a new world will emerge, green and fertile, washed clean by the waters that had swept away the old. Some gods will survive, Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, who will inherit their father's hammer. They will meet in Idavol, where Asgard once stood, and speak of former times as they build new halls in a world reborn. 2 humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, will survive the conflagration by hiding in Yggdrasil's trunk, nourished by morning dew. When they emerge into the new world, they will become the ancestors of a new human race, one that perhaps will have learned from the mistakes of the old. The sun, devoured by wolves in the final days, will bear a daughter before her death, and this new sun will shine even more brightly than her mother, illuminating a world where the cycles of conflict and destruction have been transformed into something wiser and more enduring. Ragnarok speaks to the Norse understanding that destruction and creation are inseparably linked, that sometimes the old must be completely swept away for the new to have space to grow. It acknowledges that even gods are subject to the cycles of change that govern all existence, that no power, however great, can hold back the tide of transformation that carries all things toward their destiny. In our own age of rapid change and uncertainty, the myth of Ragnarok whispers that endings, however catastrophic they may seem, contain within themselves the seeds of new beginnings. The question is not whether change will come, but whether we will meet it with the courage of the gods who knew their fate and chose to face it with honor, fighting not for victory, but for the values they held sacred. Chapter 4: Death and Resurrection, the Story of Osiris. Along the life-giving banks of the Nile, where abaces wade through shallows that reflect the eternal stars, and palm fronds whisper secrets to the desert wind, the ancient Egyptians told of a god whose death and resurrection became the foundation of their understanding of existence itself. Osiris, whose name meant powerful one, ruled over a golden age when the river valley flourished like a garden of paradise. In those early days, when the world was young and gods walked openly among mortals, Osiris taught humanity the arts of civilization. He showed them how to cultivate grain, how to brew beer from barley, how to weave linen from flax, and how to worship the divine forces that governed their lives. Under his benevolent rule, Egypt knew no war, no hunger, no injustice. The Nile's annual flood brought exactly the right amount of water to fertilize the land, and the harvests were abundant beyond imagination. Osiris was beloved not only by humans, but by the gods themselves. His wife Isis, goddess of magic and healing, was his perfect complement. Where he brought structure and law, she brought wisdom and compassion. Their love was so profound that it had begun before birth, when they embraced each other in their mother's womb. Together, they represented the ideal of divine partnership, each making the other more complete. But in the cosmic balance that governed all existence, light inevitably attracted shadow. Set, the god of chaos and the desert, was Osiris's brother, and his heart burned with jealousy so intense it scorched the very air around him. Where Osiris brought order, Set embodied disruption. Where Osiris created, Set destroyed. The rage that consumed him was not merely personal, but cosmic, the eternal tension between creation and dissolution, between the life-giving river and the death-dealing desert. Set's jealousy festered through years of watching his brother's success, until it became a poison that corrupted his divine nature. He began to plot Osiris's destruction with the patience of drifting sand and the cunning of a desert snake. The murder, when it came, was as elaborate as it was treacherous. At a great feast, celebrating the anniversary of Osiris's reign, Set unveiled a magnificent chest made of the finest cedar wood, inlaid with gold and precious stones. It was so beautiful that all the gods marveled at its craftsmanship. Whoever fits perfectly within this chest, Set announced with false joviality, may keep it as a gift. One by one, the divine guests tried to fit within the gorgeous container, but it had been crafted with supernatural precision to match the measurements of only one being in all creation. When Osiris finally lay down within the chest, laughing at what seemed like a harmless game, Set's conspirators slammed the lid shut and sealed it with molten lead. They carried the chest to the Nile and cast it into the sacred waters that Osiris had blessed. The river, confused by this violation of the natural order, bore its burden downstream toward the Mediterranean Sea, while Isis's anguished cries echoed across the land like the keening of wind through reeds. The chest drifted on currents, both earthly and supernatural, finally coming to rest in Byblos, where it became enclosed within a tamarisk tree that grew around it with magical speed. The tree became so large and beautiful that the local king ordered it cut down and made into a pillar for his palace, unknowingly making the tomb of Osiris into the central support of his royal hall. For years, Isis searched every corner of the earth for her beloved's remains. Her quest took her through kingdoms and across deserts, following whispers and dreams and the guidance of sympathetic spirits. When she finally discovered the pillar in Byblos, she used her powerful magic to extract the chest and return with it to Egypt. But even in death, Osiris was not safe from Set's malice. The chaos god discovered the hidden resting place, and in a frenzy of rage, tore his brother's body into 14 pieces, scattering them across the length and breadth of Egypt. Each fragment he cast into a different location, hoping to ensure that Osiris could never be made whole again. Once more, Isis began her patient search, this time aided by her sister Nephthys and the god Thoth. They combed every marsh and desert, every temple and tomb, seeking the scattered pieces of the one who had been the heart of their world. One by one, they found the sacred fragments, and through magic that reached deeper than death itself, began the process of reassembly. The resurrection was not simple restoration, but transformation. Isis, using all her knowledge of healing and magic, rewove her husband's flesh with spells of such power that they became the foundation of all future magic. The body she recreated was no longer merely physical, but had become something new, a form capable of existing simultaneously in the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Their reunion was brief, but profound enough to conceive Horus, who would grow up to avenge his father and reclaim the throne of Egypt from Set. But Osiris himself chose not to return permanently to the world of the living. Instead, he descended to rule the underworld, becoming judge of the dead and lord of eternity. In the hall of judgment that bears his name, Osiris presides over the weighing of hearts, where the deeds of the deceased are measured against the feather of truth. Those found worthy are welcomed into the blessed realm of the afterlife, while those found wanting face dissolution. But because of his own experience of death and resurrection, Osiris judges with both justice and compassion, understanding the struggles that mark every mortal life. The myth of Osiris became the central mystery of Egyptian religion, promising that death was not an ending, but a transformation. Every pharaoh was believed to become Osiris in death, while his successor took on the role of Horus. Every Egyptian who could afford proper burial and ritual sought to follow Osiris's path to resurrection, believing that love and magic were powerful enough to triumph over death itself. The story continues to resonate across millennia because it addresses humanity's deepest questions about love, loss, and the possibility of renewal. In Osiris's journey from divine ruler to murdered victim to resurrected judge, we see reflected our own struggles with mortality and our hope that something essential in us might survive the dissolution of the physical body. Chapter 5, Birth of the World, Izanami and Izanagi. In the beginning, when the world was nothing more than a vast, formless ocean floating in primordial chaos, the heavenly kami looked down from their celestial realm and decided that something solid should emerge from the swirling waters below. From among their number, they chose two divine beings, Izanagi, he who invites, and Izanami, she who invites, to descend and create the first land. Picture these two young gods standing together on the floating bridge of heaven, watching the endless waters churn beneath them with neither beginning nor end. In Izanagi's hands was a jeweled spear that sparkled like captured starlight, its point sharp enough to cut through the fabric of possibility itself. Together, they lowered this sacred weapon into the churning ocean and stirred the primordial waters in slow, ceremonial circles. When they lifted the spear, drops of brine fell from its tip back into the sea, and where they touched the surface, the first island was born. They called it Onagoro, the self-curdling island, and it became their new home, the first solid ground in all existence. There, in a place where heaven touched earth for the first time, they built a great pillar that reached toward the sky and began their work of creation. Around this cosmic pillar, Izanagi and Izanami performed the first marriage ceremony in the history of the world. They walked in opposite directions around the sacred post, and when they met again, Izanami spoke first, saying, "What a lovely man you are." Izanagi replied, "What a lovely woman you are." But because the woman had spoken first, their initial offspring were imperfect, a child like foam who could not stand upright, and a leech child who had no bones. Troubled by these failures, they consulted the heavenly kami, who explained that in the sacred ritual, the man must speak first. So they performed the ceremony again, and this time their words fell in the proper order. From this corrected union came the islands of Japan, each one born from their divine love, like children emerging into the world. First came Awaji, then Shikoku, then Oki and Kyushu, followed by Iki, Tsushima, Sado, and finally the great island of Honshu. 8 islands in total, each one a manifestation of the creative power that flowed between the two divine partners. But they did not stop with land. From their continued union came the kami who would govern every aspect of existence. The gods of wind and sea, mountain and valley, rivers and trees, fire and metal, all emerged from the love between Izanagi and Izanami. Each birth brought new wonders into the world, new forces to shape the landscape and guide the lives of the beings who would one day inhabit these fresh-made lands. The world grew more complex and beautiful with each divine child, as if love itself was the fundamental creative force of the universe. But creation, they discovered, could be dangerous as well as beautiful. When Izanami gave birth to Kagutsuchi, the kami of fire, the flames that blazed from the newborn god burned her so severely that she fell mortally ill. Even divine beings, it seemed, were not immune to the uncontrolled forces they brought into existence. As Izanami lay dying, more kami emerged from her tears, her vomit, her bodily functions, gods of metal and clay, of growth and decay, of all the processes that would govern the natural world. Even in death, she continued to create, her suffering becoming the source of new divine powers that would help maintain the balance of existence. Izanagi was inconsolable. His beloved partner with whom he had literally created the world, was gone, leaving him alone with the fruits of their collaboration. In his grief and rage, he drew his sword and killed the fire god whose birth had caused Izanami's death. From Kagutsuchi's blood and dismembered body came even more kami, gods of thunder and lightning, of mountains and rain, of all the violent forces that could both destroy and renew. Unable to accept his loss, Izanagi made a decision that would change the nature of existence forever. He followed Izanami to Yomi, the land of the dead, hoping to bring her back to the world of the living. The journey took him through increasingly dark and twisted landscapes until he reached the palace where his beloved now resided. When they met in that shadowy realm, Izanami explained that she had already eaten the food of the dead and could not easily return to the world above. But moved by his devotion, she agreed to petition the rulers of Yomi for permission to leave. She made only one request, that Izanagi not look upon her while she consulted with the powers of the underworld. For what seemed like an eternity, Izanagi waited in the darkness of Yomi, his patience gradually worn away by loneliness and desperate love. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, he lit a torch and went searching for his wife in the depths of the death realm. What he found there filled him with horror. Death had transformed Izanami into something monstrous, her beautiful form now crawling with maggots and decay. 8 thunder gods had taken residence in different parts of her rotting body, and her once lovely face had become a mask of corruption that embodied all the terrors of mortality. When she realized he had seen her in this state, Izanami flew into a rage that shook the foundations of Yomi itself. "You have humiliated me," she cried, and sent the foul spirits of the underworld to chase him back to the surface. Izanagi fled in terror, sealing the entrance to Yomi behind him with a massive boulder and formally dissolving their marriage across that barrier between life and death. Through the stone, Izanami called out her final curse, "Every day I will kill 1,000 people from your world." But Izanagi, though heartbroken, replied with determination, "Then every day I will cause 1,500 to be born." Thus was established the eternal cycle of death and birth that would govern all mortal existence. Feeling polluted by his contact with death, Izanagi performed the first purification ritual, washing himself in a sacred river. From this act of cleansing came the 3 most important kami in the Shinto pantheon. Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, was born from his left eye. Tsukuyomi, god of the moon, emerged from his right eye, and Susanoo, god of storms, came forth from his nose. To Amaterasu, he gave dominion over the high plane of heaven. To Tsukuyomi, he granted rulership of the night. To Susanoo, he assigned the realm of the seas. Then, his work of creation complete, and his grief finally manageable, Izanagi retired from active participation in the world he had helped to make. This ancient Japanese creation myth speaks to the fundamental role of love and loss in shaping existence itself. It suggests that creation requires partnership, that new life often comes at the cost of death, and that even the gods must learn to accept the limits that mortality places on their deepest desires. In Izanagi's journey to the underworld, we see reflected our own struggle to let go of those we love, and in his final act of purification, we find the possibility of renewal even after the most profound loss. Chapter 6. The Rebel of Heaven, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. In the flower and fruit mountain of Aolai, where mists cling to ancient peaks and waterfalls sing eternal songs to the stones below, a magical rock absorbed the essence of heaven and earth and for countless ages. This stone, polished by wind and rain, heated by sunlight and cooled by moonbeams, gradually developed a consciousness that grew stronger with each passing season, until, on a day when the cosmic forces aligned in perfect harmony, it split open to reveal a stone monkey of extraordinary intelligence and boundless curiosity. This was Sun Wukong, whose name means awakened to emptiness, though emptiness was perhaps the last thing that described his irrepressible nature. From his first moments of consciousness, he displayed abilities far beyond those of ordinary monkeys. He could leap across vast distances, see through illusions, and command the respect of all the creatures who lived on his mountain. When the local monkey tribe needed a leader brave enough to explore the cave behind the waterfall, it was Sun Wukong who volunteered, earning the title Handsome Monkey King for his courage. But even rulership of a monkey kingdom could not satisfy his restless spirit. Disturbed by dreams of mortality and driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge, Sun Wukong set out to find immortality and master the arts of transformation. His quest led him to the cave of Patriarch Subodhi, a sage whose wisdom encompassed both Buddhist enlightenment and Taoist mastery of natural forces. Under the Patriarch's guidance, Sun Wukong learned to transform his shape at will, taking on the forms of birds and beasts, trees and rocks, gods and humans. He mastered the ability to travel vast distances with a single leap, 72,000 li in one bound, enough to cross entire kingdoms in the time it takes to draw breath. Most importantly, he achieved immortality through spiritual cultivation, removing his name from the register of the dead and ensuring that death could never claim him. But knowledge without wisdom can be a dangerous thing, and Sun Wukong's pride grew along with his powers. When he returned to his mountain kingdom, he found that a demon king had enslaved his monkey subjects in his absence. The battle that followed shook the earth and split the sky, ending only when Sun Wukong's superior skills reduced the demon to cowering surrender. Victorious but unsatisfied, the Monkey King decided he needed a weapon worthy of his abilities. He traveled to the palace of the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, where in the deepest treasury lay a pillar of black iron that had once been used by Yu the Great to measure the depth of the cosmic ocean. This staff, which could shrink to the size of a needle or expand to prop up the heavens themselves, recognized Sun Wukong as its destined master and became his constant companion. Armed with his magical staff and drunk on his own power, Sun Wukong committed increasingly audacious acts of rebellion. He stormed the underworld and forced the judges of the dead to erase not only his own name from their records, but those of all monkeys everywhere, granting his entire species immortality. He invaded heaven itself, initially accepting the lowly position of keeper of the celestial horses, but when he discovered how humble his rank truly was, his fury knew no bounds. The Jade Emperor, ruler of heaven, attempted to appease him with grander titles and greater responsibilities, making him guardian of the celestial peach garden. But the very trees he was meant to protect proved his downfall. Unable to resist the immortality-granting peaches, Sun Wukong devoured them, adding their power to his already formidable abilities. When his theft was discovered, he compounded his crimes by eating the pills of immortality from Laozi's laboratory, making himself virtually indestructible. All heaven mobilized to capture the rebel monkey. Armies of celestial warriors, led by the greatest generals in the heavenly host, battled against Sun Wukong's single staff. Mountains crumbled, stars were knocked from their courses, and the very fabric of the cosmos trembled under the force of their conflict. Though they managed to capture him, no weapon could harm him, no prison could hold him, and no torture could break his defiant spirit. Finally, the Buddha himself intervened. With infinite compassion, but also infinite authority, he challenged Sun Wukong to a test. If the monkey could leap out of the Buddha's palm, he would be granted rulership of heaven itself. Sun Wukong, confident in his abilities, accepted immediately. With a mighty bound that seemed to carry him beyond the very edges of existence, Sun Wukong leapt as far as his powers could take him. He found himself at the base of 5 massive pillars that reached beyond sight into the cosmic void. To prove he had reached the boundary of all creation, he urinated at the base of the middle pillar and wrote his name on another before leaping back to face the Buddha. But when he returned, the Buddha smiled gently and showed him his hand. There, at the base of the middle finger, was the scent of monkey urine, and on another finger was written Sun Wukong's name. The 5 pillars that had seemed to mark the edge of existence were merely the Buddha's fingers, and the Monkey King's mighty leap had carried him nowhere at all. For his rebellion against the natural order, Sun Wukong was imprisoned beneath a mountain for 500 years, able to move only his head, sustained by iron pellets and copper juice brought by a guardian spirit. There, in darkness and silence, his uncontrolled energy was gradually transformed into something approaching wisdom. His liberation came when the monk Xuanzang, on his journey to India to collect Buddhist scriptures, found him and accepted him as a disciple. The remainder of Sun Wukong's story follows his gradual transformation from rebellious trickster to enlightened protector, learning through countless adventures that true strength lies not in defying authority, but in understanding one's proper place in the cosmic order. The tale of the Monkey King has captivated Chinese audiences for centuries because it embodies the eternal tension between individual ambition and cosmic harmony. Sun Wukong represents the part of human nature that refuses to accept limits, that demands to know why things are as they are, that rebels against any authority it hasn't personally tested and approved. Yet his story also demonstrates that unchecked ego, no matter how powerful, ultimately leads to suffering. True freedom comes not from the ability to break all rules, but from the wisdom to understand which rules serve the greater good and which merely serve the powerful. In Sun Wukong's transformation from rebel to protector, we see the possibility of channeling our most disruptive energies in service of something larger than ourselves. Chapter 7: The 5 Worlds, Aztec Creation Myth. In the mists of time before time, when existence itself was but a dream in the minds of gods whose names were older than starlight, the great feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl and his eternal rival Tezcatlipoca began their cosmic dance of creation and destruction. These 2 powers, wind and shadow, order and chaos, light and darkness, would shape not one world but 5, each rising from the ashes of its predecessor in an endless cycle of birth, flowering, decay, and renewal. The first world belonged to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, whose obsidian surface reflected all the hidden truths that mortals feared to see. He transformed himself into the sun that lit this primordial realm, and under his rule, giants walked the earth, beings of enormous strength who fed on acorns and lived in harmony with the simple rhythms of this young creation. For 13 cycles of 52 years, the first sun blazed in the sky, and the world knew a kind of peace. But Quetzalcoatl, driven by rivalry and perhaps by love, struck down his brother with a mighty blow that sent Tezcatlipoca tumbling from the heavens into the deepest waters of the earth. As the smoking mirror fell, his jaguars, great cats with stars in their fur and fire in their eyes, devoured the giants who had been his children. The first sun was extinguished, and darkness claimed the world. Quetzalcoatl then took his turn as the solar deity, and under his gentle rule, the second sun illuminated a world where humans learned to cultivate maize and live in communities bound by shared knowledge and mutual care. These people were smaller than the giants who had come before, but they were clever and industrious, building cities that harmonized with the natural world and developing arts that celebrated the beauty of existence. Yet Tezcatlipoca brooded in his watery exile, nursing his wounds and planning his revenge. When the time seemed right, he emerged in the form of a great jaguar and challenged his brother to single combat. The battle that followed was so fierce that it shattered the very foundations of the earth. Quetzalcoatl was defeated, and in his fury, he sent mighty winds to scour the world clean of life. Humans were transformed into monkeys, swinging through the trees of a world that had forgotten civilization. The third son belonged to Tlaloc, the rain god, whose tears could bring life or death, depending on his mood. Under his rule, the world became a paradise of lakes and rivers, of floating gardens and abundant harvests. The people of this era built great cities on the water, their canoes gliding between islands where flowers bloomed in endless profusion and birds sang songs that contained the secret names of the gods. But even paradise could not escape the cosmic struggle between order and chaos. Quetzalcoatl, still smarting from his defeat, seduced Tlaloc's wife Xochiquetzal, goddess of love and flowers. The rain god's grief was so profound that he refused to send the gentle rains that sustained life, sending instead a deluge of fire that fell from the sky like burning tears. The world was consumed in flame, and its people were transformed into birds that fled the inferno on wings of smoke and ash. Tlaloc's sister, Calchiutlacue, she of the jade skirt, became the fourth son, ruling over a world of eternal spring where rivers ran clear and the earth brought forth fruit without labor. The people of this age were perhaps the most blessed of all, living in harmony with the water goddess who made their world a garden of perpetual renewal. But the cosmic cycle demanded change, and Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, their rivalry temporarily set aside, conspired to end the fourth son's reign. They whispered to Chalchiuhtlicue that her people's love was false, that they merely flattered her while secretly mocking her generosity. Heartbroken by this perceived betrayal, the water goddess wept for 52 years, her tears flooding the world until even the highest mountains disappeared beneath the waves. Humans were transformed into fish, swimming in the ruins of their drowned civilization. Now came the time for the fifth son, the world of the present age, where we ourselves dwell in the shadow of our inevitable ending. But the creation of this world required a sacrifice more profound than any that had come before. The gods gathered in the darkness that followed the flood and asked, "Who will volunteer to become the new sun?" Only two volunteered, Tecuchistecatl, the proud lord of snails who was wealthy and beautiful, and Nanahuatzin, a humble god covered with sores whose only possessions were his courage and his willingness to serve. For 4 days, they performed penance, preparing themselves for the ultimate sacrifice. When the time came to leap into the sacred fire, that would transform one of them into the sun, Tekuchistacatl's courage failed him. 4 times he approached the flames, and 4 times he drew back, unable to face the agony of being consumed. But Nanahuatzin, without hesitation, cast himself into the fire and was instantly transformed into a blazing sun that rose in the east with such brilliant light that it outshone all the stars. Shamed by this display of humble courage, Tekuchistacatl finally leapt into the flames and became the moon, though his light was dimmed because he had hesitated while Nanahuatzin acted without fear. But even with the sun restored to the sky, the work of creation was not complete. The new luminary refused to move across the heavens, remaining fixed in one position like a burning eye that threatened to scorch the world with its unmoving gaze. The other gods realized that only blood, the most precious offering, could set the sun in motion. One by one, they offered their hearts to the cause, dying so that the 5th sun might begin its journey across the sky and bring the rhythm of day and night to the new world. Their sacrifice created the wind that would push the sun along its path and establish the cycles that would govern all life in this age. Yet the gods knew that even their sacrifice was not permanent. The 5th sun, like all those before it, was destined to end in catastrophe. The Aztec priests taught that this world would be destroyed by earthquakes, great tremors that would shake apart the very bones of the earth and consume all creation in dust and rubble. To delay this inevitable ending, humans too must offer their hearts to sustain the sun's journey. Through ritual sacrifice, through the offering of the most precious gift, life itself, the people could keep the cosmic machinery running and postpone the day when the earth would shake itself to pieces and the gods would have to begin the cycle of creation once again. This myth speaks to the Aztec understanding that existence itself requires constant sacrifice, that the continuation of life depends on the willingness of conscious beings to give of themselves for the greater good. It suggests that our world is not permanent, but precious precisely because it is temporary, that every dawn is a gift purchased with sacrifice, and that our response to this knowledge should be not despair but gratitude, and a commitment to making our fleeting time meaningful. Chapter 8. The Hound of Ulster, Cu Chulainn. In the rolling green hills of Ulster, where morning mists rise from valleys dotted with ancient stone circles, and the wind carries echoes of battles fought when the world was younger, there lived a boy whose destiny was written in the very stars that wheeled overhead. Setanta was his birth name, but the world would come to know him by another title, Cu Chulainn, the Hound of Culann, whose deeds would echo through the centuries, like thunder rolling across the mountains. From his earliest days, it was clear that this child was marked by forces beyond mortal understanding. His father was Lugh, the god of light and skill, whose divine blood flowed through the boy's veins like liquid fire. His mortal father, Sweltam, raised him with love, but could not hide the supernatural strength that manifested in every game the child played, every feat he attempted. At the age of 5, young Setanta could throw a javelin farther than men twice his size. At 7, he single-handedly defeated the boy troop of Emain Macha, the royal court, though they numbered 150 to his 1. His strength was matched only by his beauty, hair as dark as a raven's wing, eyes that shifted from gray to green like storm clouds over the sea, and skin that seemed to glow with inner light. But it was his encounter with the Smith Culann's hound that would give him his legendary name and set him on the path to his greatest deeds. Invited to feast at Kulan's fortress, the boy arrived after dark to find the gates barred and the great hound set loose to guard the approaches. This was no ordinary dog, but a creature of supernatural size and ferocity, trained to kill any intruder who dared approach its master's home. When the hound attacked, slavering jaws wide enough to swallow a man's head, young Satanta had only his hurley stick and ball, the equipment of the ancient Irish game that was his favorite pastime. Without hesitation, he struck the ball with such force that it flew down the beast's throat and out through its body, killing it instantly. Then, as the hound continued its charge, the boy seized it by the legs and dashed its head against the stone gateposts until its skull shattered. Kulan wept when he saw his faithful guardian lying dead, for the hound had been more than a guard dog. It had been his companion and protector, irreplaceable in both affection and function. Young Satanta, moved by the smith's grief, made a vow that would define his fate. "I will be your hound until a new one can be trained to take its place. I will guard your lands and your people as faithfully as the beast I have slain." From that day forward, he was known as Cu Chulainn, and the druid Cathbad prophesied that his name would be remembered as long as men told stories around fires and poets sang of heroic deeds. But the prophecy came with a darker edge. His life would be glorious but brief, burning like a shooting star across the sky of mortal memory. The test of this prophecy came when Queen Medb of Connaught, jealous of Ulster's prosperity and driven by her husband's boasts about their respective cattle, launched the great cattle raid of Cooley. Her army was vast, thousands of warriors drawn from across Ireland, united in their desire to steal the magical brown bull of Cooley and humble Ulster's pride. But the men of Ulster lay under an ancient curse that struck them down with labor pains whenever their land was threatened, leaving them as helpless as women in childbirth. Only Cu Chulainn, being partly divine, was immune to this enchantment. At 17 years old, he stood alone against the greatest army Ireland had ever seen. What followed was single combat on an epic scale. Day after day, Cu Chulainn met Queen Medb's champions at the ford, fighting by the ancient laws that demanded single combat rather than mass warfare. His skill with sword and spear was supernatural, his courage unshakable, his honor absolute. One by one, the greatest warriors of Ireland fell before his weapons. When battle fury came upon him, the Riastrad that transformed him into something beyond human recognition, his appearance became terrifying enough to freeze the hearts of his enemies. His hair stood on end as if struck by lightning. One eye receded into his skull, while the other bulged out as large as a cauldron, and his battle cry could be heard from horizon to horizon. In this state, he was less man than force of nature, dealing death with the terrible efficiency of storm wind or earthquake. But even supernatural strength has its limits. As the weeks turned to months, Cu Chulain's wounds accumulated, his exhaustion deepened, and still Queen Medb's army pressed forward. He fought through fever and blood loss, his body held together by will and divine heritage, when mortal flesh would have long since failed. The crisis came when Meb sent his own foster brother Ferdia against him, knowing that Cu Chulainn would never refuse single combat, but might hesitate to kill someone he loved like a brother. For 3 days, the two champions fought at the ford, their weapons clashing with sounds like thunder, their friendship adding anguish to every blow they struck. On the final day, when both warriors were bloody and exhausted, Ku Chulin was forced to use the Gai Bolga, a terrible spear that had been his secret weapon, gifted by the warrior woman Skathak, who had trained him in the arts of war. The weapon entered the body like a normal spear, but once inside, it sprouted 30 barbs that tore through flesh and bone, making death inevitable. As Ferdia lay dying, the two friends spoke their last words to each other, their love transcending the political conflicts that had forced them into mortal combat. Ku Chulin wept over his foster brother's body, and his grief was so profound that even his enemies felt pity for the young hero who had been forced to kill the one person he held dearest. When the men of Ulster finally recovered from their curse and arrived to drive off the invaders, they found Ku Chulin still standing guard at the ford, though his wounds were such that any mortal man would have died days earlier. He had held the pass for months, single-handedly preventing the conquest of his homeland through feats that would be remembered as long as heroes' names were spoken. But the prophecy of his brief, glorious life was not yet complete. Years later, when Queen Medb finally orchestrated his death through sorcery and treachery, Ku Chulin faced his end with the same courage he had shown throughout his short life. Even dying, he strapped himself to a standing stone so that he could meet death on his feet like a warrior, and his enemies did not dare approach until a raven landed on his shoulder, proving that the great hero's spirit had finally departed. The story of Ku Chulin speaks to the Celtic understanding that true heroism lies not in achieving victory, but in choosing to stand firm in the face of impossible odds. His willingness to fight alone against an entire army, to sacrifice his life defending his people, and to maintain his honor even when it cost him everything he held dear, makes him a model of the kind of courage that transcends the simple desire for survival. In his brief, blazing life, Ku Chulin achieved a kind of immortality that no amount of years could have given him. His story reminds us that the worth of a life is measured not in its length, but in the depth of love and commitment it contains, and that sometimes the greatest victory is simply the willingness to stand guard at the ford when everything you value lies behind you and overwhelming odds stretch out ahead. Chapter 9, The Gift of Fire, Prometheus. High on Mount Olympus, where clouds gathered like sheep in celestial pastures, and the air itself hummed with divine power, the gods held council about the newest creation that had emerged on the earth below. Humans, these strange beings called, fashioned from clay and divine breath, walked upright but remained primitive, shivering in caves, eating raw meat, and cowering in darkness when the sun set each evening. Most of the Olympians viewed these creatures with benign indifference. They were interesting in their way, these talking animals, but hardly deserving of the gods' serious attention. Let them struggle and survive as best they could, learning slowly through trial and error, developing their small societies at whatever pace their limited abilities allowed. But one among the divine assembly saw something different in humanity's potential. Prometheus, the Titan whose name meant forethought, had been granted the task of shaping these new beings from earth and water. As he worked the clay, feeling its possibilities beneath his immortal hands, he had grown to love his creations with a tenderness that surprised even himself. Unlike his brother Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, and who acted first and considered consequences later, Prometheus possessed the ability to see far into the future. In his divine vision, He could perceive what humans might become if given the proper tools and knowledge. He saw cities rising toward the sky, art that captured beauty in permanent form, music that could move even immortal hearts to tears, and wisdom that might one day rival that of the gods themselves. But to achieve this potential, humans needed something that Zeus had explicitly forbidden them to possess: fire, not merely the warmth of flame, but the transformative power it represented. Fire meant cooked food that could nourish bodies and expand minds. Fire meant light to push back the darkness and extend the hours available for learning and creation. Fire meant the ability to work metals, to forge tools, to build the foundations of civilization itself. For months, Prometheus watched his beloved humans struggle in their primitive state, while the gift that could transform their existence burned eternally in the gods' sacred braziers. Finally, his love for humanity overcame his loyalty to divine law. On a night when the moon was dark and most of the gods slept, he made his way to the workshop of Hephaestus, where the sacred fire blazed in its golden brazier. The theft was simple in execution, but profound in its implications. Prometheus broke a branch from the great fennel stalk that grew in the god's garden, hollowed out its pithy center, and filled the cavity with glowing coals from the divine flame. When he sealed both ends, the fire continued to burn within, invisible to casual observation, but ready to kindle new flames wherever it was carried. The journey down from Olympus to the world of mortals seemed to take forever, though it lasted only moments. Each step carried Prometheus further from his own divine nature and deeper into the role of rebel and teacher. He was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, choosing his love for humanity over his allegiance to the cosmic order that had shaped his existence since the beginning of time. When he reached the human settlements, scattered like seeds across the landscape, Prometheus began his work of instruction. He showed them how to kindle flames from the divine fire he carried, how to maintain those flames, how to use fire for cooking, warmth, light, and protection. But his teaching extended far beyond the simple mechanics of combustion. With fire came the ability to work metals, and Prometheus taught humans to mine ore from the earth and forge it into tools and weapons. With reliable light came the possibility of extending activities beyond daylight hours, and he showed them arts and crafts that could be practiced around the fire's glow. With cooked food came better nutrition and more time for activities beyond mere survival, and he guided them toward the development of language, music, mathematics, and medicine. In what seemed like mere seasons, but was actually generations, human civilization transformed beyond recognition. Villages grew into cities, crude shelters became temples and palaces, simple tools evolved into complex machines. The arts flourished as never before, as if the divine fire had ignited not just their torches, but their imaginations as well. Zeus watched these developments with growing alarm. The rapid advancement of human society was disrupting the careful balance he had established between mortals and immortals. Humans were beginning to rival the gods in their capabilities, and their growing confidence was leading some to question whether they needed divine guidance at all. When the king of gods discovered the source of humanity's sudden progress, his rage shook the foundations of Olympus. Prometheus had not merely stolen fire, he had stolen the future, taking the choice about human development out of divine hands and placing it in mortal ones. This was rebellion on a cosmic scale, a challenge to the very principle of divine authority over creation. The punishment Zeus devised was as ingenious as it was cruel. rather than simply destroying Prometheus, which would have made him a martyr and solved nothing. The god chose to make the Titan's immortality into a curse. Prometheus was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where each day an eagle would come to tear out and devour his liver. Each night, his divine nature would regenerate the organ, ensuring that his torment could continue for eternity. But Zeus's vengeance did not stop with Prometheus himself. For humanity, the gods created Pandora, the first woman, fashioned with divine beauty, but filled with curiosity that could not be contained. When she opened the jar that held all the evils that would plague human existence, disease, death, war, hatred, envy, and despair, she released forces that would ensure that the gift of fire came with a price that would be paid by every generation. For centuries beyond counting, Prometheus endured his punishment, his daily agony, a reminder to any who might consider challenging divine will. Yet he never expressed regret for his choice, never begged for forgiveness, never offered to undo what he had done. His love for humanity had been stronger than his fear of consequence, and he accepted the price of that love with the dignity of one who had acted according to his deepest convictions. Finally, the hero Heracles, during his 12 labors, was permitted to free the suffering Titan. But by then, Prometheus's gift had taken root so deeply in human nature that it could never be retrieved. The fire he had stolen burned not just in hearths and forges, but in the human spirit itself, the spark of curiosity, creativity, and defiance that drives mortals to reach beyond their apparent limitations. The myth of Prometheus speaks to the complex relationship between knowledge and suffering, between progress and loss of innocence. It suggests that every great advance in human civilization comes with a price, that the very gifts that elevate us also expose us to new forms of pain and vulnerability. Yet it also celebrates the kind of love that is willing to sacrifice everything for the welfare of others, the courage to challenge unjust authority even when the cost is terrible, and the recognition that some gifts, once given, become so fundamentally part of who we are that they can never be taken away, no matter what punishment follows their bestowal. Chapter 10: The Witch of the Woods, Baba Yaga. Deep in the forests of old Russia, where silver birches stand like candles in a cathedral of green shadows, and the wind whispers secrets in a language older than human memory, there dwells a figure who embodies both terror and wisdom, destruction and transformation. Her name is Baba Yaga, and her very existence challenges every simple notion of good and evil, hero and villain, blessing and curse. Her hut appears in clearings where no clearing existed moments before, balanced impossibly on enormous chicken legs that can carry it anywhere the old witch desires to go. The fence surrounding her dwelling is built not of wood, but of bones, human bones, bleached white by countless seasons, topped with skulls whose empty sockets glow with cold fire when darkness falls. The gate is made of human legs, its hinges crafted from human hands, its lock a mouthful of gleaming teeth. Baba Yaga herself defies easy description. Sometimes she appears as a withered crone, her iron teeth filed to points, her nose so long it scrapes the ceiling when she lies down, her wild gray hair streaming behind her like smoke. Other times she seems younger, terrible in her beauty, with eyes that hold the depth of winter nights and the promise of spring's return. Always she moves with purpose, whether flying through the sky in her mortar, using her pestle as a rudder, or striding through the forest on legs that can stretch to span miles with a single step. To some who encounter her, she is death incarnate, a child eating monster who delights in causing suffering and terror. Her oven burns constantly, hungry for the flesh of those foolish enough to stumble into her domain without proper preparation or respect. The forest around her hut is littered with the bones of travelers who attempted to deceive her, who showed disrespect, or who simply failed to understand the rules by which she operates. But to others, those who approach with courage, honesty, and the wisdom to recognize power when they see it, Baba Yaga can be the greatest benefactor imaginable. She possesses knowledge that spans centuries, magical abilities that can reshape reality itself, and resources that can solve any problem for those clever enough to earn her favor. Consider young Vasilisa, whose stepmother sent her into the forest on an impossible errand, hoping the girl would never return. Armed with only a small doll, a gift from her dying mother, Vasilisa walked deeper into the woods than any person from her village had ever dared to go. As darkness fell and wolves began to howl in the distance, she saw ahead of her a clearing lit by an eerie glow. There stood Baba Yaga's hut, its chicken legs scratching at the earth like those of some enormous bird. The fence of bones gleamed in the moonlight, and the skull lanterns burned with flames that cast no warmth. Vasilisa's knees shook with terror, but she remembered her mother's words. As long as you are brave and honest, your doll will help you through any difficulty. When the witch emerged from her dwelling, towering above the girl like a force of nature given human form, Vasilisa found the courage to speak. "Grandmother," she said, using the respectful term her mother had taught her, "I come seeking fire for my family's hearth. Will you help me?" Baba Yaga's iron teeth gleamed in the skull light as she smiled. "Help?" she cackled, her voice like breaking ice. "I help those who serve me well, but I eat those who fail my tests. Are you prepared to work for what you seek, little girl? Are you ready to risk everything for a handful of flame?" The tasks Baba Yaga set were impossible by any normal measure. Vasilisa must clean the witch's hut until it gleamed, sort a mountain of mixed grains into separate piles, and prepare a feast from ingredients that seemed to have no earthly existence. Failure in any task would mean death. Success would earn the fire she needed to save her family. But Vasilisa's mother's doll, which held within it the protective love of all the women in her lineage, whispered guidance when the girl's courage flagged. When the cleaning seemed hopeless, the doll showed her which magical words would compel the dirt to sweep itself away. When the grain sorting appeared impossible, the doll called upon mice and birds to help separate the seeds. When the cooking challenged her limited skills, the doll guided her hands and ensured every dish emerged perfectly prepared. Through each trial, Vasilisa learned that Baba Yaga's tests were not arbitrary cruelties, but lessons in disguise. The cleaning taught her to recognize the power hidden in humble domestic work. The sorting showed her the importance of patience and attention to detail. The cooking revealed the transformation that occurs when raw materials are combined with knowledge and care. When all tasks were complete, Baba Yaga examined the results with eyes that missed nothing. Slowly, grudgingly, a smile of genuine approval spread across her ancient features. "You have done well, child," she said, and in those words was acknowledgement of Vasilisa's transformation from frightened girl to capable young woman. The fire Baba Yaga gave her was no ordinary flame, but one of the skull lanterns from her fence, its cold light deadly to evil, but harmless to the innocent. When Vasilisa returned home, the supernatural fire consumed her cruel stepmother and stepsisters, who had sent her on the errand hoping she would die, but left the girl herself untouched. This pattern repeats through countless stories of those who encounter the witch of the woods. To the lazy, the dishonest, the disrespectful, she brings well-deserved destruction. But to the brave, the truthful, the worthy, she offers gifts beyond imagination, magical objects that can grant any wish, knowledge that can solve any problem, power that can overcome any obstacle. Baba Yaga represents the dangerous wisdom that lies at the heart of transformation. She is the teacher who demands everything from her students, the force that destroys what we think we are so that we can become what we're meant to be. Her tests are not punishments, but initiations, her apparent cruelty a form of love, so demanding that only the strongest can survive it. In the deepest sense, she embodies the mystery of life itself, simultaneously creative and destructive, nurturing and terrible, wise and wild. She reminds us that the most valuable gifts always come with a price, that true growth requires us to face our deepest fears, and that the line between blessing and curse often depends not on what we receive, but on what we bring to the encounter. Those who meet Baba Yaga and live to tell the tale are forever changed by the experience. They have looked into the face of primal power and found within themselves the courage to engage with forces beyond their understanding. They have learned that respect and honesty can open doors that no amount of force could breach, and that sometimes the most terrifying encounters lead to the most profound transformations. In our modern worlds, where we prefer our wisdom sanitized and our teachers safely credentialed, Baba Yaga serves as a reminder that the most important lessons often come from the most unexpected sources, and that growth requires us to venture beyond the safe boundaries of what we think we know into the wild forests, where real magic still dwells. Chapter 11. The World on Turtle's Back. Long before there were continents or oceans, before the sky separated from the earth, or light distinguished itself from darkness, there existed only the vast expanse of water that stretched from horizon to horizon without interruption. In this endless sea, ancient beings swam in the depths, creatures of immense size and wisdom who had existed since the very beginning of time itself. Above this primordial ocean, in a realm of pure light and harmony, lived the sky people in a world where illness and death were unknown. Great trees grew there, their roots extending deep into the soil of heaven, their branches reaching toward a sun that never set. Among these celestial beings lived a young woman of extraordinary beauty, whose pregnancy carried within it the seeds of an entirely new kind of existence. But as her time approached, the woman began to crave a particular food that did not exist in the sky world, bark from the roots of the great tree of life that grew at the very center of heaven. Her husband, desperate to satisfy her longing, began to dig around the massive trunk, following the roots deeper and deeper into the celestial earth. The work was exhausting, requiring him to excavate far beyond what seemed reasonable, but love drove him onward until his digging created a hole so deep that light began to shine through from the world below. When the woman came to see what her husband had accomplished, she leaned over the opening to look down at the light that streamed upward from beneath. The sight that met her eyes was impossible, an endless expanse of water, so vast that no land was visible anywhere. As she stretched forward to see more clearly, The edge of the hole crumbled beneath her weight, and she fell through the opening between worlds, tumbling toward the vast ocean below. The creatures of the water world saw her falling from an impossible height, a being of light plummeting toward their dark realm. They understood immediately that she could not survive in their aquatic environment. Her nature was fundamentally different from theirs, requiring solid ground to sustain her life. But in all the endless sea, there was no land to break her fall or provide her with a place to rest. Great Turtle, ancient and wise beyond measure, rose from the depths where he had swum since the beginning of time. "I will catch her on my back," he announced to the other water creatures. "But my shell alone will not be enough to sustain a being from the sky world. She will need earth, soil in which the plants of her realm can grow and flourish." The other animals understood the magnitude of the task before them. Earth existed, but only in the deepest places of the ocean, far below where any air-breathing creature could survive. Yet they also understood that this falling woman carried within her the future of existence itself, and that her survival might determine whether new forms of life could emerge in their water-bound world. Otter volunteered first, diving deep into the cold darkness, following the water down through layers of increasing pressure and decreasing light. He swam until his lungs burned and his strength began to fail, descending farther than any otter had ever gone, but the bottom remained beyond his reach. Finally, forced to choose between continuing the dive and drowning, he turned back toward the surface, arriving with empty paws and lungs, nearly burst from the effort. Beaver tried next, his powerful body cutting through the water with determined strokes, his flat tail propelling him into depths where the pressure began to crush his bones. He too pushed beyond all reasonable limits, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the death of the Sky Woman and the loss of whatever new possibilities her survival might bring. But even his strength proved insufficient, and he too returned to the surface, empty-handed, his body nearly broken by the attempt. One by one, the strongest swimmers and deepest divers of the water world made the attempt. Loon, with her streamlined body designed for underwater pursuit. Mink, quick and agile enough to slip through currents that would trap larger animals. Each pushed themselves to the very edge of death, and each returned with nothing but the knowledge that the earth they sought lay even deeper than they had imagined. Finally, when it seemed that all hope was lost, little Muskrat spoke up. She was the smallest of all the diving animals, her body seemingly too frail for such a monumental task. The others tried to dissuade her, pointing out that if their greater strength had proven insufficient, her lesser abilities could only result in her death without achieving the goal they all sought. But Muskrat possessed something the larger animals lacked, a desperation born of love and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance of success. She dove with the knowledge that she would not return alive, descending through layers of water that grew darker and colder with each passing moment. The pressure crushed her small body, her lungs collapsed, her heart slowed toward stopping. Yet somehow, driven by will beyond physical possibility, she continued downward until her tiny paws touched something solid. With the last of her strength, she scraped a small pawful of earth from the bottom of the world and began the impossible journey back toward the surface. She died during the ascent, her small body giving out long before she could reach air and safety. But when the other animals found her floating lifeless on the surface, they discovered that her paws still held the precious soil she had died to obtain. Though the amount was tiny, barely enough to fill a human palm, it contained within it the potential for an entire world. Great Turtle had positioned himself directly beneath the falling Sky Woman, and she landed gently on his broad shell, just as the other animals placed Muskrat's hard-won earth around her. The moment the soil touched Turtle's back, it began to expand, spreading outward in all directions, growing into an island, then a continent, then an entire landmass capable of supporting the kind of life the Sky Woman represented. The woman herself gave birth to twins whose nature reflected the dual possibilities inherent in all creation. One child, born in the normal way, would become the force of growth, harmony, and life-giving creativity. The other, born through his mother's side in a manner that caused her death, would become the force of destruction, conflict, and necessary endings that balance creation with dissolution. Those twin brothers would shape the new world between them, one creating mountains while the other carved valleys, one calling forth gentle rains while the other summoned violent storms, one filling the earth with useful plants and animals while the other brought forth thorns and predators. Their eternal balance would ensure that the world remained dynamic rather than static, alive rather than perfect. And through all the ages that followed, Great Turtle continued to carry the world on his back, swimming slowly through the cosmic waters, his steady progress creating the cycles of day and night, season and year, growth and rest that would govern all life on the island that had grown from a handful of earth obtained through ultimate sacrifice. This Haudenosaunee creation story speaks to the understanding that existence itself is a collaborative effort, that the continuation of life requires the willingness of beings to sacrifice for others, and that even the smallest among us may hold the key to possibilities that the strongest cannot achieve alone. It suggests that the earth we walk on is not merely a collection of resources for our use, but a living being deserving of respect and gratitude, and that our responsibility is not to own or control our world, but to remember that we are guests on Turtle's back, dependent on his continued patience and the sacrifices of countless others for our very survival. Chapter 12. The Once and Future King, Arthur. In the mists of post-Roman Britain, when Saxon invaders pressed westward like a tide of iron and fire, and the old ways seemed destined to vanish beneath the weight of new conquests, there arose a king whose very name would become synonymous with the golden possibility of perfect leadership. Arthur, whose story begins in mystery and ends in prophecy, embodied the eternal human dream of a ruler who governs not through force, but through wisdom, not through fear, but through love. The circumstances of his birth were shrouded in magic and necessity. Uther Pendragon, High King of Britain, had fallen desperately in love with Igraine, the beautiful wife of his enemy, Gorlois of Cornwall. Their love was so consuming that it threatened to tear apart the fragile alliances that held the Celtic kingdoms together against their common enemies. Merlin, the great wizard, whose wisdom spanned both earthly and divine realms, agreed to help Uther win his heart's desire, but only at a price that would echo through the generations. Using magic older than the stones of Britain, Merlin transformed Uther's appearance so that he could enter Tintagel Castle in the guise of Gorlois himself. On the very night that the real Gorlois died in battle, Arthur was conceived, a child born of passion and deception, but also of a love so profound that it reshaped the destiny of a kingdom. When the child was born, Merlin claimed him according to their agreement. taking the infant away to be raised in secret, far from the intrigues and dangers of court life. Arthur grew up believing himself to be the son of Sir Ector, a minor knight of good character, never suspecting that royal blood flowed in his veins or that his destiny was written in the stars themselves. The revelation of his true nature came in a manner that spoke to the divine approval of his claim to leadership. After Uther's death, Britain fell into chaos as rival nobles fought for the crown, each claiming superior right to rule. Into this turmoil, Merlin introduced a test that would bypass all arguments of blood and birth. Embedded in a stone before a great cathedral was a sword that could only be drawn by the rightful king of Britain. For months, the greatest knights and nobles of the realm attempted to free the weapon, but it remained fixed as if it were part of the stone itself. Tournaments were held around the marvel, bringing together all the flower of British chivalry, but none could budge the sword even a hair's breadth from its resting place. Arthur came to one such tournament, not as a competitor, but as a squire to his foster brother Kay, whose own aspirations to knighthood required someone to carry his weapons and tend his equipment. When Kay discovered he had forgotten his sword at their lodgings, young Arthur volunteered to retrieve it, running back through the crowded streets with the eagerness of youth. But when he reached their quarters, he found them locked, the keys held by servants who had gone to watch the tournament. Frustrated and anxious, not to disappoint his brother, Arthur remembered the sword in the stone that he had passed earlier. Surely no one would mind if he borrowed it just for the tournament. He would return it as soon as Kay's matches were finished. The blade slid from the stone as easily as a knife from soft butter, coming free at his touch with no resistance whatsoever. Only when he returned to Kay and the gathered nobles began to stare at him with expressions of awe and terror did Arthur begin to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. The test was repeated, this time before witnesses who could attest to its authenticity. Arthur placed the sword back in the stone, and the greatest knights of the realm once again attempted to draw it free. Once again, it remained immovable for all but the young man who had pulled it free without even understanding its significance. Thus began a reign that would become the standard against which all future kingship would be measured. Arthur's court at Camelot became a beacon of justice and honor in a world too often ruled by might alone. The round table he established broke with centuries of tradition by seating all knights as equals, with no man taking precedence over another except through deed and character. The knights who gathered around that table represented the flower of chivalry from across the known world. Lancelot, whose skill in battle was matched only by the purity of his devotion to his ideals, though that devotion would ultimately lead to tragic conflict with his loyalty to his king. Gawain, whose strength waxed and waned with the sun, making him nearly invincible at noon, but vulnerable in the evening hours. Percival, whose spiritual purity would make him worthy to achieve the Grail quest that eluded lesser men. Together, they embarked on adventures that cleansed the land of ancient evils and established justice in places where chaos had reigned for generations. They fought giants who terrorized innocent villages, defeated knights who abused their power, and brought the protection of Arthur's law to the farthest corners of Britain. But perhaps their greatest quest was the search for the Holy Grail, the cup that had caught Christ's blood at the crucifixion and was said to appear only to those pure enough in heart to be worthy of its blessing. This quest tested not just the knight's courage and skill, but their spiritual development, revealing that physical prowess alone was insufficient for the highest achievements. The quest fractured the fellowship of the Round Table as knights scattered across the world in search of the sacred vessel. Some never returned, lost in distant lands, or claimed by perils beyond their ability to overcome. Others returned broken by their failures, unable to accept that their worthiness fell short of the Grail's requirements. Only a few achieved even a glimpse of the sacred cup, and only one, Sir Galahad, proved pure enough to attain it fully, ascending to heaven in the moment of his achievement. As the Round Table's fellowship diminished, other shadows began to gather around Arthur's kingdom. His half-sister Morgana, born of his father's earlier liaison and trained in the magical arts, nursed grievances and ambitions that grew more dangerous with each passing year. His wife Guinevere and his greatest knight Lancelot fell into a love that neither could deny nor honorably fulfill, creating a triangle of loyalty and passion that would ultimately destroy everything Arthur had built. The end, when it came, was not defeat by external enemies, but collapse from internal contradictions. The very ideals that had made Camelot great, absolute loyalty, perfect honor, pure love, proved impossible to maintain when filtered through human hearts capable of conflicting loyalties and competing desires. The final battle at Camlan saw Arthur facing his illegitimate son, Mordred, who had usurped the throne in his father's absence and now commanded an army of those who felt betrayed by the high ideals they could never attain. Father and son met in single combat that left both mortally wounded, the bright dream of Camelot dying with them on a field littered with the bodies of the greatest knights who had ever lived. But even in death, Arthur's story refused to end. As he lay dying, a mysterious barge appeared, carrying 3 queens who claimed him for their own realm. They bore him away to Avalon, the Isle of Healing, where he rests still, sleeping until the hour of Britain's greatest need shall wake him to return and restore the golden age that his death had ended. The legend of Arthur speaks to the eternal tension between ideal and reality, between the world as we dream it might be and the world as our flawed humanity shapes it. His story suggests that perfect justice may be unattainable, but worth striving for nonetheless, that the pursuit of noble goals has value even when those goals prove beyond our reach. In Arthur's rise from unknown boy to legendary king, we see the possibility that greatness can emerge from the most humble origins. In his reign, we glimpse what human society might achieve when guided by wisdom, justice, and genuine care for the welfare of all. And in his promised return, we find hope that the failures of the past need not be permanent, that somewhere in the mists of possibility, the chance for redemption always awaits. Conclusion: where stories meet dreams. As the last echoes of these ancient tales fade into the quiet spaces of night, we find ourselves at the boundary between waking and sleeping, between the stories we've shared and the dreams that await in the gentle darkness ahead. These myths, born in the earliest moments of human consciousness, have traveled across thousands of years and countless retellings to reach you here in this moment, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of all who have listened and been transformed by their magic. From the grief of Gilgamesh that taught us to value our mortality, to the courage of Arthur that showed us leadership's true cost, these stories speak to something eternal in the human experience. They remind us that we are part of a great continuity, linked to all who have wondered at the stars, feared the darkness, loved beyond reason, and hoped beyond evidence. In the myths of creation, we see reflected our own deepest questions about where we come from and why we exist. In the tales of heroes and their journeys, we find models for our own struggles against the obstacles that life places in our path. In the stories of gods and mortals, we explore the complex relationships between power and responsibility, between the forces we can control and those we must learn to accept. The great gift of mythology is that it speaks to us in the language of symbol and metaphor, reaching parts of our understanding that mere facts and figures cannot touch. These stories don't just inform us, they transform us, opening doorways in our consciousness that lead to deeper appreciation of the mystery and meaning that surround us in every moment. As sleep begins to claim your attention and the words you've heard start to blend with the images that rise from your own unconscious depths, remember that you are now part of these stories' continuing journey. By listening, you have become a keeper of ancient wisdom, a link in the chain of transmission that ensures these tales will continue to live and grow and touch new hearts in generations yet to come. Let the rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into the peaceful darkness where all stories ultimately lead, the shared dream of humanity, where Gilgamesh still searches for meaning, where Arthur sleeps until the hour of return, where the great turtle continues his patient journey through the cosmic waters, bearing us all safely toward whatever awaits in the morning light. Sleep well, dreamer. The stories will be here when you wake, but for now, they live within you, weaving themselves into the fabric of your own unfolding tale. In dreams, we are all heroes on impossible quests, all gods shaping new worlds, all children listening to the first stories ever told around fires that burn eternal in the darkness of human memory. The greatest myths, after all, are not those that end, but those that continue in the sleeping minds of all who have heard them and understood that some truths are too large for waking consciousness to hold. Let them carry you now toward rest, toward peace, toward the place where all stories converge in the gentle mystery of dreams.